I'd rather be with you. Yeah. Yeah, I'd rather be with you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Good Vibes. My name is Alice, and today I will be with James. I hope you're doing great. I am the CEO of the family. For those who don't know the family, we believe that anyone can become a great entrepreneur, and that's why we bring education, tools, and access to capital to hundreds of founders. It's been 8 years, and you may have heard of some of the startups we've been accompanying, like Algolia, Payfit, Fretlink, Merci Andy, etc. And since the beginning of the lockdown, actually, we wanted to create a closer connection and bound to overcome the distance. So we started Good Vibes, and basically Good Vibes is all about discovering an amazing entrepreneur. Most of the time it's entrepreneurs that are from the family, and sometimes I decide to bring in very special guests, and today we are with a special guest. His name is James Vincent, and he's been working hand in hand with amazing entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, like Brian Chesky, like the founders of Airtable, of Alan, of Zenly, of Snapchat. And we're going to discuss with James how to build actually a human and coherent narrative. It's all about the strategy, not only the brand, but it's really about the reason why you're doing what you're doing and how to embody with the image, with the communication, with the campaigns, with the visual identity, with everything. How do you make it coherent so you can convey your messages? And of course, some of you are watching us from YouTube. You are welcome, and we are testing new setups. I am doing this with hand in hand with Studio Majoral. If you don't know them, go check them. It's an amazing way to do a live podcast with video. And if you want to ask questions to James, just join us on Opin. We have put the link right below. It's much more intimate as a tool to jump into the conversation. And after the show, you will be able to participate in the chat roulette. The chat roulette is all about meeting randomly other participants and connecting with them. Voila. Welcome, James. Thank you for being here today with me with this in this amazing show, Good Vibe. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great. I'm adjusting to living in Brussels after 20 years of living in California and Venice Beach, so it's a little different. But yeah, my wife is here and is from here, so we decided this summer to come for the school year and put the kids in the international school so they're learning other points of view other than being an American, which we think is pretty cool. And you know, so and then I continue to work with my company based in California. So I work evenings and have mornings and afternoons to do other things. So
why did you decide to leave the US?
I lived there for 25 years. So my wife, we met in Paris 20 years ago, and we always talked about living in Paris, where she was, where we met. And but then with COVID and just this moment, we kept talking about having the European experience and having our kids just have more of a cultural mix to them, not being Californians. So they're good surfers, they're great at soccer, they, you know, some of which works here and some of which doesn't. They're playing a lot of football here, but not so much surfing. And so, yeah, we just sort of made the plunge, and I think we're really grateful for it, actually. I know, you know, COVID's not the best of times for COVID here. But there is, America's just it's a funny moment right now in America. It's very toxic, and with the election and stuff, we're fine to be sitting it out. We sent our postal vote a month ago, and supporting how we can. But yeah, I think it's a better environment for our kids right now. And hopefully by next summer, things will be somewhat back to normal. Who knows?
All right.
But we thought we'd take the opportunity, and we're glad we did.
Welcome to Europe. I'm
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. And I'm so glad because it's an opportunity for your company to start working with local startups, with local entrepreneurs. And I guess, I mean, you've been working with Brian Chesky, you've been working with Steve Jobs, and you've been working as well with Jean-Charles Samuelian from Alan. I mean, have you seen some main differences between both? I'm not talking about them precisely, but in terms of culture, you know, do you see the approach different?
Yeah, of course. It's been remarkable how many Paris-based companies we've worked with in the last year. And we really enjoy, I think ideas here are currency, and people enjoy talking about ideas. And so we've actually really loved it. And I think California is the same. California, from a different optics, from a venture-based pioneering, the last 500 years was all about moving west, and you can't go any further west than California, otherwise you go east. So we've lived in California amongst sort of pioneering. I worked with Apple from 2000 to 2011, and then worked with Airbnb and Snapchat and Glossier and all those companies. And now there's our company there. And there's definitely differences. I mean, I think we tend to enjoy working with more humanistic founders, so they find themselves coming to us. I would argue, I think Brian's a pretty exceptional founder in terms of really creating the good human that I think when you go on Airbnb, you really bring your best human. It's a very thoughtful brand. They've really, don't go there, live there was the campaign that we did for them. We launched the experiences thing, which was sort of trying to, before COVID, of course, but they'll be back, is expanding people's views of the world and their interaction with different communities. And going from, a generation that doesn't particularly want to own things as much as have experiences. And that was really the opportunity for Airbnb to go from sleeping on a couch, the accommodation business, to build a brand that was big enough to hold kind of a whole new generation of people that wanted to travel in a new way. And I feel like Airbnb, and it's not a simple, it's a tricky, in some cities, there's some issues and, it's not simple, but in general, I think the product is designed very carefully to encourage the best human. When you do your review,
Totally.
I think products and messaging, and when you join, you kind of write a little note and say, "Hey, I'm in town. I love your little place. Just with my family. Could I stay?" And they go, "Oh yeah, sure." And then you get a little gift when you arrive, and there's a little guide to the local bars and whatever. And then when you leave, you write a private review, which I always think is genius. I think Yelp and TripAdvisor are full of horrible reviews, and they just sort of make you feel awful because all the comments are, are kind of very subjective. And so the private review kind of removed some of the bile from that discourse, And so what it did was it said, tell your host issues. There wasn't any toilet roll, or the thing didn't work, or you need to have a look at the paint, it's peeling in here, but otherwise it was great, rather than the review being all about that. And so what they did was they separated the two. And so the experience on Airbnb gets better and better, but the public discourse is really positive and human. So I think you can design humanity into products. It's not just about, and that's kind of part of the scope of what we tend to do. So, yeah.
Great. And in terms, because I have a kind of caricature in my mind, is that Americans are way better at storytelling. Okay, and we tend to be much more on the technical side. Or we want to design the best product ever, but in a way we are unable. When I say we, European, are less good at selling it, at marketing it.
Yeah, I think maybe you're right. There's a certain shyness that doesn't exist in America. They're taught from an early age to promote themselves and not feel shy about that. And there's a certain sense of not wanting to be too bold in the pitch from here. But I think it's funny. I often say to founders, don't hide behind humble. You've got something really amazing. Stop hiding it. This is what it is. Go and talk about it this way. And these are the words you should use. And you should say, I saw this category. And I think one of the things that we're so interested in, because we work across so many different categories, this summer we worked with Oatly, the oat milk, and Bumble, the dating app. And, I don't know, Pigment, which is Eleanor's new startup. Meaty, which is like a mycelium meat replacement, new big brand in the US. Biology companies, DNA companies, AI companies. So, and all of them, I think what we're able to do is bring perspective to a category. So that the issue with a founder is that they're stuck in their category. And I don't mean that like in a bad way, but that's all they think about. And we come in and we're fresh or relatively fresh. And we go, you know, here's a piece of inspiration from somewhere else. Or have you thought about, so actually, if I start to tell you some stories about Airtable or Alan or Zenly or whatever, we start with the category. Like, you know, in general, you know, healthcare is like kind of a failing category. So, but obviously Alan has this huge opportunity to bring technology and humanity to it and get people to feel accountable for and responsible. You know, I think there's a little bit of just sort of pushing it off. And I think there's an opportunity here. And I don't mean that as a burden, but for you to become more actively involved in your health and your well-being.
Okay, James.
And I think...
Sorry, yeah, go for it. You can end.
I just think every category, there are things like that. You know, Zenly maps are so historic and full of old buildings, whereas actually the maps that you care about have your friends on it, right? I mean, that's a modern way to look at a map. Oh, my friend's over there, my friend's over there. Great. And Zenly actually encourages people to be together more, not less, on social, which is, there's a little plug for Antoine, just so that in case he's listening.
Totally. I'm in the room with you, okay? I'm a young entrepreneur. I just started my company. I have what I call a brand. I mean, I have a name, I have a logo, I have a mission, and I have some clients, and I'm starting to get some traction. Okay. What's the process working with you? Like I'm coming to talk to you because I want to expand and to really create a much stronger brand. And so what are we talking about in the room? How does it work?
Great question. It's generally a 6-week sprint, typically, sort of kind of every week for a couple of hours together. And we'll go from very wide, where we'll really look at the category and everything you send us and start sort of doing, and that leads to a provocation session, which is all about pulling the genius out of the founder. So we often think that the genius has it, they just can't quite say it. That's our starting philosophy. It's like, you know why you started this company. You feel it. You just haven't probably fully articulated it. And we're like narrative therapists, which is the hilarious term one of my founders used for us, which is like, I know you want to say it, but I think what you want to say is that. And they go, oh my God, that's great. That's what I want. Okay, great. So, and then the story that we pull out of them turns into strategy and not the other way around. And so, you know, I think that means that brands that are in culture are ones that are going to stick around because you have a relationship with them. So how does it feel? Okay, so every week for an hour or 2 hours, we get on, there's 4 of us, there's 4 partners. One of us is a great storyteller that used to run Mother in London. One of us is a great strategist that ran Nike and Apple. One of us is an entrepreneur that ran their own companies and advised, ran their own consultancy. And there's me. And we would have the founder team, so let's say 3 or 4 or sometimes just 1, it really depends, but a small team. And we would orchestrate a conversation where we were really listening and prodding them. It's really, this isn't about going away and da-da, and you go, oh shit, I don't like that. It's like, there is no da-da moment. We're constantly throwing in ideas. And then we throw you the deck, like at the end of the meeting, and then you throw in your comments on Google, whatever, or whatever, you know, or on the deck or whatever you want to do. And then we respond a week later, and then you go, oh, I love that, but I don't like that. Okay, great. Well, let's keep working on that. That's good. Okay. And we just keep moving. And even at the very last meeting, we had one yesterday with Alex from Scale AI. And we were about to land something, and we were like, wait a second, isn't it that? And it was like, I love that. It's like, okay, great. So, and all of the foundational work we've done together. So I think what it's about is those moments of growth, right? It really only makes sense if you're kind of a growth moment. So you've established your product market fit, you have a team, you have some products, you have some community, you've got some level of traction, and you're like, and normally people have just got a round of funding, right? Because we're not the cheapest thing on the planet. So they go, oh, we need to work with people that are going to create like a very large trajectory, a long-term plan. What's our dent in the universe, as Steve would say. And so that's the moment. And they come to us and say, let's pull it apart. One of the things I say is what got you here might not get you there. We'll pull apart everything and put back together like, oh no, we love that. Let's put that back in. That's great. And so we're really looking at it from the biggest possible aperture. Like, could you be Airbnb or Snapchat, or could you be Airtable or Spin or, you know, GoodRx or Alan or Zenly or, and you know, all of these are a little advanced at the size of companies that you're normally chatting with. But as you so rightly said, they're on their way there. And at some point you get to the point where you're like, okay, I want to bring in kind of, you know, people that will really elevate this conversation to understand I have a huge opportunity.
So your first material is the founder. You get the genius out of the founder, as you say. So you need to be excited by this person, right? I guess that's if you are not convinced by this person, you won't choose to work with them. Or you can tell me, no, Alice, I've been working with people I didn't really
don't like.
Yeah.
It's funny because we kind of trust the process a little bit. And what that means is, as long as the founder's up for being fully engaged, we can pull out of the most deeply technical or scientific, non-storytelling type founder their ability to find that story. And we'll, you know, sometimes we support more than others because some are more natural at it and some are not very natural at it. But our job is to put that story together for them. So some are more naturally into it and more natural storytellers, and so they're easier to work with, or actually sometimes more challenging. All the way to ones that have never found a good way to tell the story. You know, they're like, I have this amazing product, doing great. I just can't figure out how to, you know, someone says, what are you doing? Like, where's the elevator pitch? You know, you've got like five floors in an elevator. Can you tell me what it is? And are you going to use words that I remember that aren't just like a category description? So language, I think, is super important. So we try to find language that you then kind of go on to own, and you use that language over and over and over again. Because I think that's part of how you can build a brand.
In my way, at my own level, I would say, I've been doing this with the founders we accompany at the family. So we spent 3 days in a castle, and we brainstorm about starting from their story, about the name, about the mission, and the way to embody it and to make it become real. And most of the time I have the same question. Should I talk about me, myself, what I like, or should I put myself in the shoes of my customers and really be empathetic with them and talk just for them and only for them? Like, and this is often a question that is coming back. What do you tell them?
Yeah. That's a great question. So it's funny. Steve Jobs used to answer, "We're making products for ourselves," because we understand the possibility of technology. We have families. We want graceful, and technology didn't work 20 years ago. When you used to have a Dell computer with Microsoft on it just didn't work. And those silly smartphones that weren't very smart. And then Apple comes along with MacBooks and iPhones, and so I think the best answer to that question is those people that are the confluence of those two things is the perfect situation, meaning they're building it for themselves because they either are or they truly deeply understand the needs of the customer. And so sometimes I guess there are times when there's a gap there. I remember a couple, but I'm not going to mention them just because in case he gets upset. But there were a couple of founders that were a little too bombastic, and they weren't gentle enough for the brand they were trying to build. And so we'll be like, okay, dude, like this is your role in this brand is to be this. And cut to their all hands a week later. They did an all hands and said, we're not customer focused enough, and here's why, and put a picture of themselves up on the screen. And so they were really focused, and that was a level of self-awareness that I think is awesome, because they needed to better understand and get in the shoes of the customer. So I don't know whether I'm answering a question. The confluence of those two things.
But when you accompany Snapchat, for instance, I mean, they are not exactly the users, right? I mean, the founder is already 20 plus something.
Yeah, but I'm glad you raised that one. So I know Evan pretty well. He lived, his place was in Venice, so he used to come by every 2 weeks for like more than a year. So, and their stock has just shut up because Facebook can't manage its platform. So all the advertising went over to them. And, he operated in a category of when social networking became social media, the price of free was really expensive, meaning this is advertising supported. You're on here because they want your eyeballs, and then they're going to take your data and they're going to do whatever they want and sell it to all kinds of people. And it's funny because Evan's heart told him this is not right. And so I don't know whether you remember, but he changed the app like 3 years ago, and it was really rejected. He pulled the influencers out of the app because he's like, influencers aren't your friend. They're not your friends. But he didn't. And that was kind of around the time we started working together, because we're like, you have to explain this to people, because everyone's just like, what are you doing? Why are you throwing the influencers out? It's because influencers aren't your friends. And Snapchat is about real friends. And we can't be about real friends if influencers are, so I'm not trying to suggest Snapchat is like, the solution to world peace. But I do think it's honest and genuine. It's about a few friends being honest with each other. And I think that's a beautiful thing in social media, where honestly, most people are lying to strangers. You don't have 15,000 friends, and that really happy picture on Instagram wasn't your day. That really wasn't your day. You didn't do it. Come on. You took one great picture and you had a shitty day, whatever, right? And so I'm not suggesting that we get all negative, but there's something about so actually Evan's personal story, and there's always a personal story, was at college, there was stuff put on social media about him on Facebook that he was very embarrassed about. And he's like, wait a second, I need to figure out how this stuff can go away. And if you think about it, Snap's first thing was its ephemerality, right? It just disappears. It's like, oh, that's Snap. Oh, gone. And that means that you're natural. You just do it. And right? And sometimes a little too much, but mostly you're not so composed, pretending to be something. My kids are on Snapchat and they're just being. And I actually think Evan is the voice of a new generation. I think he's only 28 now. He was 21 when I first met him, which was just, it's so soul destroying when you meet someone so young and so successful. I mean, it's so inspiring. I'm sorry, I meant inspiring. Yeah. It's inspiring. But I actually think he's an example of someone that really felt it. He felt the consumer, the customer. And so he built software. And then I think he's crossed a few really tough moments and has proven himself to be a great leader of that brand. It's now, I think the stock's at like 35 now, and it was like 5 2 years ago. So he's done phenomenally well since the IPO.
When you work with a founder, you're not looking at their figures, you're not looking at their results. You're really focusing on the magic they bring to their customers, right? You're not having a business kind of side. But still, you have an impact on the strategy. Yeah.
I mean, look, we're not McKinsey, right? So we're not going to put a team of expert analysts to create a report that is, the future of the digital shopping platforms or whatever, right? We're not going to do that. That's not how we work. We're kind of the opposite in a way. We're more heart than head. Meaning we're looking to work with the founder through this sort of narrative therapy to find a story that then can come to life in everything you do. And I think maybe this is important for me to say. We work with founders normally before they go off and redesign the brand or do a marketing campaign or do some comms activity. We do foundational ideas fairly early. So we worked with Emily at Glossier in 2016 when it was before it became a unicorn, and she's like, I need to figure out how my values work and how we build, because there'll be 1,000 people coming. Like, what company are they joining? So yeah, I think that growth moment is the real sweet spot for us, and then it impacts everything they've done. So Glossier, we talked about what kind of what's the brief for a store? Like when there's this pop up, what is it, right? Because they're famous for their Instagram moments and they're right. And now I'm going back around the other side and telling you Instagram's awesome. But Glossier is really thoughtful about, conversational commerce, right? She's ex-beauty editor from Vogue, and they create this discourse around beauty that, I believe women really want to talk about beauty with other women in a safe environment, and she creates that safe environment. So Glossier is this safe environment for a conversation around beauty. It's like, what do you think of this? Well, you go in the store and it's all these young girls going, oh, this looks good. Do you like that color on me? And so giving a voice to beauty, I think, was the kind of the thought that we gave them. But I think, I would say they're a very big community-driven super brand. I think Airbnb is a big super community-driven super brand. And those tend to be, and those are very consumer examples. And I can tell you with just as much enthusiasm a bunch of business examples that we've been working on recently.
Oh yeah.
So from an Airtable, we just worked with Howie at Airtable, and there it was kind of, I think it was a little bit of businesses changing, right? And the people coming in and out of these businesses who are these like self-motivated, super innovative people are coming in and out of companies, and Airtable needs to be the tool that they bring with them. That's what it is. It's not like 20 years ago where you do a big ad for Oracle at the airport and it's not a corporate sell. This is a tool for entrepreneurs moving from place to place and building. And, it's a little bit like Slack built. It's just like, oh, why is that group working better? Oh, sometimes maybe Slack doesn't make you work better. Who knows? You just talk a lot, but you're doing a lot of chatting anyway. But Airtable is really a productivity tool. And so we kind of changed the aperture in terms of how Howie was thinking about it, to think about this sort of personal value creation platform, not corporate. That new companies are being built in an entrepreneurial fashion, and the new tools that people, not unlike the people that are probably watching this video, naturally, intuitively build companies now. It's remarkable.
The prosumer, the professional consumer. You bring this tool with you and you want your company to use it, so you push from the bottom, so the tool can be accepted totally. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, there's so many, from Figma to Notion to Affinity to Pigment to, there's a million, like productivity software is really a big deal, and we're working on a bunch of different projects now.
How was it to work with Airtable, basically? Because that's a really interesting example. What kind of story, what is the genius inside the founder?
Yeah. Well, I mean, his story, Howie's story was he had a little startup and it got bought by Salesforce. And so he worked in Salesforce for a while. And then he was like, no, there has to be a better way. Like Salesforce was a revolution 15 years ago, but we're in a different world now. And, so I think Salesforce is a great case study. They built a terrific business with new tools. But we're in a different era now. And this era is far more self-motivated people, like putting their magic to work is another sort of phrase we were talking about with him. And, Howie's a software engineer and a terrific guy with really big ideas in design and thought and those things. And I think we were just helpful to him in articulating that, And so he didn't come in as probably by his own self-admission, he would not say he was the best storyteller in the world, but he was quick to identify it. And we were like, stop hiding behind humble, like go out there and tell this story. Because I think it is a revolution. And of course, there are many tools like Airtable, that basically the modern businesses are being built on software now in a way unlike ever before.
We are big fans of Airtable. Everything at the family is created on on Airtable. And I'm a big fan of this founder as well. So I know he's very humble. So that's why I was interested.
Yes,
he's not the typical storyteller.
Yeah,
I guess.
Right. No, for sure. And so that but I think that's maybe proof in the pudding that we can work with all kinds of founders because I think some of our experience just means we figure out how to pull the story out and figure out how to get them comfortable with telling the story.
Exactly. And on this point, James, because you go back to the main reason why they're doing what they're doing, and you go back to that little story, that little moment when they realize, and you stop and pick this moment, and they realize they can take one step back and realize, oh yes, that's true. That's another way to look at it, and that's a good story. And then there are tons of ways to make that story become shared and alive. Or there are tons of different ways. I mean, the how is the how in your hands as well. Or do you stay at that level of the story, the reason why, and the main values, and then you work with other agencies or I don't know what? I mean, how does it work?
Yeah, our final delivery document is all about, starts with a story, but it turns into the strategy. So we'll say, this is the main story. These are the talk tracks for all the different audiences, that consumers, to your employees, to your partners, to the industry, to the public. And then we'll also create what we call story on a page, which has all of the implications for everything you're doing. So we'll talk about products, we'll talk about comms, we'll talk about design, people, internal, like, are we recruiting, like, what's the recruitment brief? Sometimes people are just like, I'm ready to grow. I need to be up there hiring, the people that Google and Apple are getting. So how do I tell a story? And I think actually it's sometimes as important, if not more important, which is, what's the story that's going to get the amazing people to come work for you? And I think that's really a pivotal moment for the growth. The people that you go hire in this growth moment will be the decision between whether you succeed or fail. And so what's your way of appealing to people by telling this story that I want to go work for that company because they're going to do something great and I want to be part of it. So yeah, I think it impacts internal values, recruitment, product, comms, messaging, design, all of those things. And so a founder might say to us, oh, we want to work with a design company after you, so can you write the brief for that? And we're like, great. So we'll write a brief at the end of the process and say, the role of design is to do this. So here's the overall story. You need design to give the feeling of ease of use or friendliness or whatever the thing is. And so...
But you are not feedbacking. I mean, you are not providing feedback then at that moment. I mean, it's in the end of the design agency, and you trust them to do their work.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who they want to work with. Sometimes we recommend some companies that we love working with, and so they come in at the end of our process, and we share that conversation. We work with Studio Koto in London because James and I worked together on Airbnb for 3 years, so we just know each other very well, and a bunch of other companies too, and they fit into the end of our process, and then they carry on, so it's kind of seamless.
Okay, James, how it's been to work remotely? Because this kind of work often happens when you are in the same room with eye contact and chemistry and silence. How does it work from a screen?
Yeah. I mean, it was a tough year. I think at the beginning of the year, we were describing how people used to come to our little craftsman house in Venice and hang out with us. And of course, February and March, there wasn't much of that. And then so we kind of reorchestrated our process to be all online, and we used various pieces of software to help share and collaborate. And we created this 6-week sprint format where we see you regularly at the same time normally. So you sort of try to find a way in a virtual environment. But I would say that we've been incredibly surprised, positively surprised by how much you can get done, how much focus there is in a room when you're not, right, getting your coffee and sitting down looking at whether that shirt looks nice or
I feel like I'm really into you right now.
Exactly.
I mean, you're like, there is nothing else. And
nothing else.
Yeah. The concentration level.
That's it. And so that's what we try to do. I mean, most people are exhausted after a couple of hours with us because what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And then, oh, that sounds good. Oh, founder, wait a second. What do you think of that? Is that good? Is that interesting? I like that. Not sure about. Okay, great. So that's good. Okay. All right. Let's keep thinking about that. let me give that some thought. Great. Okay. So send us a note tomorrow about what you're thinking. So I think we've had to adapt and adopt for sure these techniques to ensure that there is, I kind of chair the meeting. So it's my job to sort of make sure, Alice, come on. Like, what do you think? Like, is that interesting? Is it not? We just can't work if we don't have a responsive founder team. And so sometimes, some people try to turn off their camera, and I'm like, no, camera's on all the time, 100%. You're here. I mean, you just like, anyway, let's do this together. And I'm going to make sure that every minute is worthwhile for you. And we really get into it, and it becomes quite heated. And as you say, I think it's been a surprise to all of us, that how penetrative, how focusing it is. No doubt there are, there's a toll on all of us that, not seeing each other as humans that will pay in the future. But for us, I think it's been a fairly successful transformation, and we're busier now than we were a year ago. So people seem to have adapted, and very few people ask us for in-person meetings anymore.
Yeah,
everyone
true,
just assumes.
True, totally. James, how does it feel when you've been working with Steve Jobs every day, preparing the keynotes of Steve Jobs? Like, isn't the pressure on your shoulder to always do better or keep the flame alive while working with people? Because you're really at the beginning, you're starting from scratch again and again and again and again and again. and how do you manage that when you've been working with such a genius in the very early days of your career? I mean, how do you keep your flame alive?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm just going to flip it, because what I'm going to say to you is, when Steve passed in 2011, I for a year or so sort of lost my motivation for what I do next. And then what I thought was, is there a way that I can create a vehicle where, instead of it being Steve Jobs every week, it's a bunch of people that are aiming to be Steve Jobs or trying to get there. And maybe I've learned some stuff with Steve about how to elevate those founders. So it really is a model to try to replicate how stimulating those 11 years were. Because, iTunes and iPod and iPhone and iPad and App Store and right. And then all of these businesses have since then been built on that platform. And of course, that was hugely exhausting 11 years without many breaks. But, that would never not, turn it down if it came again, because it was incredible. And I feel like maybe founder is me and my partner's desire to constantly be stimulated. So we love to jump into a new category and to be stimulated and to try to stimulate a conversation with founders, that all of whom won't go on to be Steve Jobs, but maybe some version of.
All right. I think we have a lot of questions. Lorenzo, maybe you can show me the questions. Yes, but about you, the European, I mean, okay, maybe we go, so we'll go through some questions, okay, James, from the entrepreneurs, because I love when it's interactive, and I've been monopolizing you since the beginning. Okay, you try to find a short answer, because I think we're going to have many questions. So why do you think that Europeans are bad at storytelling? Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy or an imposter syndrome due to our humble culture? It's from Guilain.
Right. Yeah. Look, I mean, take France, right? I mean, take you guys. 5, 6, 8 years ago, it was a hostile environment for entrepreneurs. That's very recent, right? And you guys kind of, right? I think I'm right in saying, kind of were created to say, wait a second, why are you doing this? And other mechanisms and Macron and, have been built around that desire to uplift entrepreneurship. I think in America, they're born as entrepreneurs. The American dream is to be an entrepreneur. The French dream might involve some small cottage in the countryside and going back and forth to the south of France. But
lifestyle is important. A good lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah. The American dream is, I have my own company, or I'm, fulfilling some part of the American dream. So I do think it's, but I mean, just look at what's happened. I mean, Paris has really transformed in the last few years, and there's so many exciting new founders coming through. But maybe they haven't been brought up in that culture, and so there's more education required, which is basically what you do, as I can see.
So
you recognize
it can change, basically. And it can
it
change
seems that way.
fast. Yes, totally. What are the challenges of moving from advertising to creating narratives for entire businesses? Any mistake you've learned from? It's a question from Samuel.
Yeah, great question. 20 years ago, advertising was something. It was important. It did things, right? And people looked at it, and then people don't look at advertising very much anymore.
No.
So it's become less important. CMOs don't really, we work with founders, not CMOs. I have nothing against CMOs. They're often a very active part of the way we work. But I just feel like the conversation, what we've seen in the last 20 years, is so much change and opportunity for companies to create new systems, because the systems are not, government, education, healthcare, transport, right? They're all not doing that well. They're not showing up well. COVID has revealed, right? And so I kind of feel like there's a need by the world to take some of the entrepreneurship and idea and innovation and yeah, exactly, and put it into the system. And because I don't know that government gets it enough to know how to. Things are moving so fast. When you saw Mark Zuckerberg up against the Senate and no one even knew how to ask the question because they didn't even know what a good question was. So then you're like, okay, this is that's not Anyway, but anyway, we believe in optimistic founders that can provide positive change to the world, and so yeah, I think there's a totemic shift there. But I feel like founders have a responsibility to behave well and build good companies. And so, whether that ultimately the relationship between commerce and government needs to shift, I think government needs to get its act together and figure out how to, well regulate platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Google, right? And I think you're making attempts at that here in Europe more than in the US, but it's just beginning now. But it's just been a rocket ship. So they've just left the institutions behind. And I think part of our hope is that we can forge them into a positive impact, not a negative one.
Super cool answer. How does competition impact the creation of narratives? So do you take competition into account, basically? And for example, did you think about Booking.com when working with Airbnb? Benjamin is asking.
It's really funny. We were... it's actually a great question because you're kind of like, wait a second, should we be, sometimes it's helpful to have a foil. So a foil is just, I'm not that, right? And so IBM, Apple was not IBM in 1984, right? We're not that, we're this, right? We're something different, think different. So sometimes I think it's helpful. It's interesting you raised the Airbnb one because actually the foil really was hotels, but we never wanted to say it. So we never said it. We never took on the hotel industry because we don't need the very powerful hotel lobbying industry against Airbnb. So we were very careful never to say anything bad, but make it clear that the kind of experience you're going to have is entirely different. So I would say the answer to competition is it's a really good data point, and it might be the context that helps you understand where you're going. But I wouldn't obsess about it. I think if you over-obsess about it, you don't have your own compass. You don't decide your own journey because you're just in relief to someone else. So I would definitely be aware of it and put it into your plan. Make sure you're different and make sure it's clear. But I wouldn't go head-to-head with competition. I think mostly that's not. I did a Mac versus PC campaign where we went head-to-head with Microsoft, but that was a whole other story 20 years ago.
What are the books that guided you in your life? That guided you?
I'm sorry to be the most boring guy that says Sapiens, but I mean, but let me at least qualify it for 1 second. I'm a huge sort of history and political economy sort of social scientist, and I think that storytelling through the ages, right? So Sapiens, for me, said there were 5 revolutions, right? so fucking simple. Like the history of mankind. You ready? 5, right? There was the cognitive revolution when they got a brain. We got a brain. The agrarian revolution when we moved in, we figured out farming and we didn't have to hunt and gather, and so we could create sustenance and feed ourselves. I'm going to get this wrong in the order. The Renaissance, the scientific, the last 500 years has been the scientific revolution. The industrial revolution of 300 years ago, we all moved to cities. And this revolution we're going through now, which is the tech revolution, it's that big. It's that big. I think if you zoom out, you would, it's the 5th one. And they all created meteoric changes in how humans interact with each other. And so I think I really benefit from that and read a lot of those sort of historical contexts, because I think man has lived through, man, women, humans have lived through these kinds of issues before. The Roman Empire went back and forth between the Senate and Caesar and the Senate and Caesar for 450 years, and hopefully we're not going to do that in America. But, in general, some of these stories aren't new. And so I actually think looking into history is super beneficial. I think it gives you context. It gets you out of the current moment, and you're not just reactive to the moment. You're seeing the bigger pattern. You're saying, okay, so we're going there in a world that's like that. Okay. And so how do we deal with that? So I think perspective, and I have a bunch of other books that are just, the history of the world, or like I get a terrific amount out of human behavior, studying human behavior historically and what they've done, and what's worked and what's not worked, and Mein Kampf, hard to read, but oh my God, it's something. Stalin's book, there are Churchill's book. Sorry, I'm not going to come up with a French author, and
that's
so
okay.
I sound like an idiot. But some of these people, I don't know. I get great inspiration from great leaders, and studying the history of human behavior, because I think it repeats itself. So you can maybe see ahead. If you have some sense of that, maybe you can see some sense of the near future.
It's been really a great moment with you, James, and I hope we'll have tons of opportunities to work together.
Yeah.
100%. That was really fun. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you. See you.